I, 34 male, am a pretty average guy working a standard corporate finance job, just trying to build a stable life and pay down a mortgage. For a long time, I thought my wife, 32 female, and I were building that life together. We had been married for 5 years, but over the last 6 months, her entire personality underwent a massive shift. She got a new job in marketing, and suddenly, everything we had was no longer good enough. She became incredibly demanding, perpetually unsatisfied, and constantly talking about her boss. Her boss was a wealthy executive who apparently understood corporate culture and luxury in a way my boring spreadsheet brain just couldn't grasp. Things finally hit a breaking point on our 5th anniversary. I had made reservations at a high-end downtown steakhouse. It was the kind of place where just securing a table cost a week's worth of groceries. The lighting was dim, soft jazz was playing, and the atmosphere was designed entirely for romance. But the air between us felt like a heavily pressurized cabin. My wife had not looked up from her phone since the appetizers arrived. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the deep frown lines she only ever seemed to wear around me lately. I took a slow sip of my water, watching her thumbs fly across the screen. I tried to keep my tone completely even, devoid of any accusation. I just asked if we were going to celebrate tonight, or if she was working. She let out this sharp, exhausted sigh, placing the phone face down on the table with exaggerated care. She told me she was handling a crisis, and that not everyone could just clock out at 5 and forget the world exists. I reminded her that it was our anniversary, and she had promised to leave the office for one night. She immediately crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. She brought up the fact that I had promised we would be going to Bora Bora this year, yet here we were at a local steakhouse. She said things change, and her boss needed her to handle a client issue. The entitlement just rolled off her. For half a year, she had contributed absolutely nothing to our joint savings. She insisted her new higher salary was her fun money, while my income covered the mortgage, the utilities, the car payments, and the insurance. I had swallowed my frustration for a long time to keep the peace, but I was entirely out of patience. I pointed out that we were not in Bora Bora because she had maxed out 2 of her personal credit cards on designer bags back in March. I had to drain our entire vacation fund just to help her pay down the balance, so the interest would not drown our household. Her jaw tightened instantly. She defended the purchases, claiming she needed them for networking. She told me I simply didn't understand corporate culture, but her boss understood. She said her boss knew you had to dress the part to get ahead, and that he had actually told her just yesterday that she deserved an upgrade. She said he thought she should be driving a Mercedes to client meetings, not the Honda we currently shared. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that her boss could buy her the Mercedes then. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. The surrounding chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade away completely. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and sheer disbelief. Then, she slammed her hand down on the table, making the silverware rattle loudly. She called me pathetic. Her voice was rising fast, drawing the attention of the couple sitting at the tables next to us. She said I had zero ambition, that I just sat in my cubicle running my little spreadsheets, and that I expected her to be happy with mediocrity. She told me she deserved better. I quietly warned her to keep her voice down.
She refused.
She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The entire dining room went dead silent. Everyone was watching us. Then she screamed it, at the top of her lungs. She screamed that she didn't need me, and that her boss treated her better anyway. The words just hung there in the quiet restaurant. Every single eye was on us. Her chest was heaving, and she looked weirdly triumphant, as if she had just played an unbeatable winning card in an argument. But instead of feeling embarrassed or angry, I just felt this strange, absolute clarity wash over me. All the confusion and stress of the last 6 months completely vanished. I picked up my napkin, wiped my mouth, and placed it neatly on the table. I stood up, pulled $200 bills from my wallet, and dropped them next to my plate to cover my half of the untouched meal and the tip. I told her to go to him, then. I turned around and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back once. I didn't check my phone. I drove home in absolute silence, my mind already calculating the exact logistics of dismantling our marriage. I slept in the guest bedroom that night. The next morning, I woke up at 5, my usual time. I checked the house. It was empty. She hadn't come home at all. That told me everything I needed to know. I packed a gym bag and headed to my local fitness center. Lifting heavy weights was the only way I knew how to burn off the residual adrenaline from the night before. I walked toward the squat racks and saw my gym buddy. She is a sharp, 42-year-old former corporate litigator who now runs her own consulting firm. We had known each other for about 2 years, spotting each other, complaining about our joints, and talking about fitness. I also knew her husband. In fact, her husband was my wife's boss. My wife had bragged about the connection when she first got the job, thinking it was a fun coincidence. The boss's wife racked her weights and looked at me, noting that I looked terrible and asking if I had slept. I grabbed a towel, wiped down a bench, and told her the truth. I said my wife and I were done. I explained we had a massive blowout at dinner the night before, and that she had screamed her boss treats her better than I do in front of an entire restaurant. Then I mentioned she didn't come home. The boss's wife stopped drinking from her water bottle. She lowered it slowly. Her casual, friendly demeanor completely vanished, replaced by a cold, highly analytical stare. She repeated my words back to me, confirming that my wife specifically said her husband treats her better and that my wife didn't come home. I nodded. The boss's wife looked at the clock on the wall. She told me her husband had claimed he had an emergency off-site vendor meeting. He had packed an overnight bag yesterday morning and said he was staying at a hotel downtown. We just stood there in the middle of the gym. The pieces fell into place with sickening precision. The late nights. The sudden influx of expensive gifts my wife claimed were corporate bonuses. The constant networking events. The boss's wife told me to give her 2 hours. She grabbed her gym bag and walked out without another word. I went home and started putting my wife's belongings into heavy-duty garbage bags. I was meticulously careful. I did not damage a single item of clothing or a single pair of shoes. I simply removed her entire presence from the master bedroom and lined the bags up neatly in the hallway. Exactly 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the boss's wife. The subject line was just a single period. Attached was a forwarded email thread spanning 4 entire months. Her husband had forgotten to sign out of his personal email account on their shared home iPad. The emails were completely undeniable. There were hotel booking confirmations, receipts for the designer bags my wife had claimed she bought on her own credit cards, and lengthy discussions about how the boss was maneuvering the company budget to secure a massive, entirely unearned cash bonus for her. The absolute worst part was a recent exchange where they actively mocked me. My wife had written an email saying I was so clueless I actually believed she was working late on a major client account and that she couldn't wait until her promotion went through so they could finally ditch the dead weight. I read the entire thread twice to make sure I wasn't missing anything. I forwarded a copy to a secure cloud backup I had just created. I forwarded another copy to the printer in my home office. Then I called my lawyer. I told him I needed to file for divorce and secure my assets immediately. My lawyer moved fast. Since I had previously drained the vacation fund for her debt, our only remaining liquid cash was our joint emergency savings and checking accounts. He advised me to go to the bank and transfer exactly 50% of those joint funds into a separate, individual account in my name only. He explained that taking all of it would look punitive to a judge and could backfire, but securing exactly half preserved the status quo and protected me from her draining the accounts out of spite. He also advised me to contact my payroll department and change my direct deposit immediately. I spent the rest of the day setting up the financial barriers. My wife finally walked through the front door at 6 that evening. She saw the garbage bags lined up in the hallway. She dropped her keys on the console table, crossed her arms, and adopted a posture of supreme entitlement. She scoffed, asking if I was really throwing a tantrum like a teenager. She claimed she stayed at a hotel because she needed space after I abandoned her at dinner. She demanded that I apologize to her, put all her clothes back in the closet, and then maybe we could talk about couples counseling. I didn't argue. I just walked over and handed her the printed stack of emails. I told her counseling wouldn't fix this, that I was filing for divorce, and that I wanted her out of my house. She looked at the top page. All the color instantly drained from her face. Her arrogant posture collapsed for exactly 3 seconds. But then, survival instinct and pure entitlement took over. Instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, she threw the papers on the floor. She started yelling, accusing me of hacking her boss's email. She said it was a federal crime and that she was calling the police. I calmly told her to read the sender address. I explained that his wife found them on their shared iPad and sent them directly to me. She froze. The realization that the boss's wife knew hit her much harder than the divorce declaration did. But she still didn't back down. She resorted to the dirtiest trick possible. She marched straight into the kitchen, grabbed a heavy wooden dining chair, and deliberately threw it backward. It smashed violently against the wall, leaving a massive, jagged dent in the drywall. She turned to me with a vicious sneer. She said she would tell the police I threw that chair at her. She said she was going to file a domestic violence restraining order, that I would be removed from the house by force, and that she would get exclusive occupancy while the divorce proceeded. She actually smiled as she told me I would be paying her legal fees, paying her alimony, and paying the mortgage while she lived there comfortably. She dialed 911. She put the phone to her ear and started crying. It was a terrifying, Oscar-worthy performance. Real. Wet tears streamed down her face. She told the dispatcher her husband was destroying the house, that he was out of control, and that she feared for her life. I didn't say a single word to stop her. I simply walked into the hallway, stood next to her, and pointed up at the small, inconspicuous black dome mounted high in the corner of the ceiling. I told her very softly that I had installed indoor security cameras last month to keep an eye on our dog while we were at work, and that they record high-definition audio and video. She hung up the phone instantly. She didn't even say goodbye to the dispatcher. She ran to the hallway, grabbed the suitcase she had brought in with her, shoved her way past me, and sprinted out the front door before the police even had time to dispatch a unit. When the officers eventually showed up to investigate the dropped 911 call, I invited them in and played the camera footage for them. They watched her throw the chair and make the fake call. They took a detailed report documenting her filing a false emergency claim and her intentional destruction of property. As soon as they left, I forwarded that police report directly to my lawyer. The next day, the legal maneuvering began. The boss hired a very aggressive, very expensive corporate attorney who sent me a terrifying cease and desist letter. It threatened to sue me into bankruptcy for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and extortion if I showed those emails to anyone else or spoke about the affair. I forwarded the threat to my lawyer. He called me laughing. He explained that it was purely an intimidation tactic. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and I hadn't extorted anyone because I hadn't asked for a single dime in exchange for my silence. He filed the divorce petition that same afternoon. In our state, while you can file for a no-fault divorce, proving adultery acts as an absolute bar to alimony. My lawyer attached the emails and the police report as exhibits in our initial filings to establish rock-solid grounds for denying her any spousal support whatsoever. My wife's newly hired lawyer fired back with a ridiculous set of demands. They wanted 50% of my retirement accounts, permanent alimony, and a court order forcing me to pay off her massive credit card debt. Her lawyer claimed she had sacrificed her earning potential to support my career. The sheer audacity of the claim was staggering, considering she currently made more money than I did, entirely because she was sleeping with her boss. They clearly thought they could outspend me, drag the process out, and wear me down until I settled. They thought wrong. The actual revenge required precise timing. The boss's wife and I communicated through our lawyers and coordinated our strikes perfectly. On a Tuesday morning, at exactly 9 o'clock, the boss's wife filed her divorce petition. She lived in a state where the dissipation of marital assets could be aggressively penalized by the courts. She had already subpoenaed all of her husband's financial records, proving he had spent over $40,000 of their joint marital money on jewelry, high-end hotels, and luxury gifts for my wife. The boss's wife sued him for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty to their marriage. 15 minutes later, at 9:15, I hit send on a highly detailed, professionally formatted email. I sent it directly to the HR director, the chief compliance officer, and the CEO of my wife and her boss's company. I did not use any emotional language. I simply laid out the verifiable facts. I attached the forwarded email thread. I pointed out specific dates where the boss had approved expense reports for my wife that were classified as client entertainment, cross-referencing them with the hotel receipts proving they were actually romantic weekend getaways. I highlighted the emails where the boss openly discussed manipulating the annual review process to guarantee my wife a massive bonus she had not earned. I noted that these actions directly violated the company's code of ethics regarding conflicts of interest, misappropriation of company funds, and sexual favoritism in the workplace. By 11 o'clock that morning, security guards escorted both my wife and her boss out of the corporate building carrying cardboard boxes. The internal workplace investigation was swift and brutal. The company audited the boss's expense reports and found massive, undeniable irregularities. They terminated him for cause immediately. Being fired for cause completely voided his lucrative severance package and wiped out all of his unvested stock options. They terminated my wife on the same day for violating the strict company policy requiring disclosure of relationships between subordinates and management, and for active participation in corporate expense fraud. The fallout was completely catastrophic for both of them. Without her inflated salary, my wife could no longer afford her aggressive, expensive attorney. She had to drop him and hire a much cheaper, less experienced lawyer just to keep up. During our mandatory settlement conference, her new lawyer desperately tried to argue for temporary spousal support, claiming she was currently unemployed and facing hardship. My lawyer shut the argument down before the guy even finished his sentence. He calmly stated that their client was fired for gross misconduct and corporate expense fraud directly related to her adultery. He reminded them that under state law, voluntary impoverishment or termination for cause does not entitle a spouse to financial support. Furthermore, the documented adultery completely barred her from receiving any alimony regardless of her employment status. He finished by sliding a piece of paper across the table, casually mentioning that if we were forced to go to trial, our first witness would be her former HR director. My wife sat across the conference table, glaring at me with pure hatred. But the smug, overwhelming entitlement was completely gone. It was replaced by a hollow, desperate anger. She knew she had absolutely no leverage left. She ended up signing a settlement agreement that afternoon where she walked away with nothing but the used car she drove and her own massive mountain of personal debt. I kept my house, my retirement accounts, and my savings. Her boss fared much worse in the end. Because he was fired for cause and lost his stock options, his financial standing plummeted overnight. His wife used his documented misuse of marital funds to secure a massively disproportionate share of their remaining assets in court. The judge awarded the boss's wife the primary residence, the vacation home, and heavily sanctioned the boss for dissipating funds on an affair. He went from being a wealthy, arrogant corporate executive to a disgraced, unemployed middle-aged man living in a small rented apartment, facing potential civil legal action from his former company to recover the stolen expense funds. The dust has finally settled. My house is quiet now. I patched and painted over the dent in the drywall myself. I go to the gym, I work my steady job, and I sleep peacefully through the night without wondering where my spouse is. The intense anger that fueled me through the initial shock and the legal battles has completely faded, leaving behind a very calm, steady satisfaction. People who operate entirely on entitlement and manipulation eventually destroy themselves. Sometimes you just have to step out of the way, provide a little documentation, and let them hit the wall they built for themselves at full speed. If you want to learn how to pack a garbage bag with military precision or need tips on how to let the trash take itself out, subscribe to my updates.